This video is to help you with the last 3 problems for your e-learning assignment for this week, and it is due tomorrow night, Tuesday night at midnight. And you just have 3 problems. They are a little bit longer, so I did an example for you. It's on the handout, but I'm going to walk you through it very quickly. What you're doing for these last 3 problems is you're comparing 2 statements and deciding if they are indeed logically equivalent. So for my example, I chose the statements P and Q or R, and P or R and P or Q. So to determine if they're logically equivalent, I have to set up the appropriate columns. I'm going to need 8 rows because I have P, Q, and R. And so I went ahead and made my columns for P, Q, and R. Those should be very straightforward at this point. If you're not comfortable with that, you should go back and watch the intro video that I made for truth tables, or even better yet would be to go into files on Canvas and look at the PowerPoint from this past week. But after I got those 3 columns made up, then I did a P and Q column, and then put the whole statement together, P and Q or R. And looking there, for the P and Q, obviously both P and Q have to be true for me to put a true in that column. And then the last statement, the last column, I should say, for the first statement is an or statement. So if the P and Q column or the R column is true, then I put a true there. And then for the next statement, I had to create a P or R column and a P or Q column. And both of those obviously are or statements. So if either P or R is true, I put a true in that column. And if either P or Q is true, I put a true in that column. And then the last column puts those 2 statements together as an and. So I had to compare the P or R column and the P or Q column. And they both had to have a T or be true for me to put a true in the last column. Once I get the whole table filled out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be comparing the 2 columns that I have in red, which are my 2 statement columns. So I'm circling it right now, the P and Q or R column, and I'm going to compare that to the P or R and the Q or R column. In order for me to conclude that these are logically equivalent statements, they have to have the exact same truth values all the way down in their columns. And as you can see, they do not. And what I did there was I highlighted in red where they disagree. So you can see in the 4th column down, they don't agree, and you can see in the 7th spot down in each of those columns, they don't agree. So that's why I concluded that they were not equivalent, because they don't have the same truth values. And I told you to compare columns 5 and 8, which are the 2 that I circled, and then it would be the 4th and the 7th spots down where we're comparing. So this is problem 98, and I am going to go ahead and work through it with you, just in case you need a little extra help. So what I've done is I've set up a chart, and I did think it through ahead of time and think about the fact that I was going to need 8 rows because I have P, Q, and R, and 2 to the 3rd is 8. And then I also went ahead and thought about how many columns I would need. Now you might say, well, how do you know that for sure? Well, you know for sure you need a P, a Q, and an R, and as you can see, I've already filled those in. And then from there, let's just talk about how I would know what other columns I need. If I read the statements from left to right, the first thing I see in parentheses is P or Q. So I'm going to need a P or Q column. So I'm going to go ahead and create that, P or Q. Then the next thing I see is R, but I already have a column for that. So that means it's okay. The next column can be the whole first statement put together. And I'm going to go ahead and do that in blue. So I'm going to have P or Q and R. Okay. And then I come to the next statement, which I've purposely written in green to differentiate it. And the first thing I see is a P and R. I obviously already have the P and the R separated, so I need to put a P and R titled column, so I'll do that, P and R. And then the next thing I come to is a Q and R, and I'm going to need that also, so Q and R. And then the last thing I'm going to need, and I'm going to do it in green, is I'm going to need the whole statement, which is the P and R or the Q and R. Okay, so now let's just go through and see how we would fill these columns in and then talk about comparing them so that we can make the call on whether or not these statements are logically equivalent. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the P or Q column, and there, of course, if either one of them is true, I get to put a true there. So the first four, P is true, so P or Q is going to be true. And then when I get to the next row, it looks like P is false, but Q is true, so I can put a true there. And Q is true again, so that's true. And then the last two, they are both false, so I'll have to put a false for the last two. That column is done. Now, to do my final statement or my final column for the first statement, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the P or Q column to the R column. And it's an and statement, which means they both have to be true for me to put a true in this column. So let's take a look at that. So P or Q and R, it looks like the first one I can say is true. The next one, though, is going to be false because this is an and statement. The next one is true, and then false, and then true, and then false, and then false, and the last one is also false. So there is the makeup for that first statement. It goes true, false, true, false, true, false, false, false. Now the next column is my P and R column, and so there obviously I'm going to look at columns P and R, and it's an and statement, so they both have to be true for me to put a true there, and so the first one is going to be true, the next one is going to be false, the next one is going to be true, the next one is false, and then it's going to go false the rest of the way down because P is false the rest of the way down. And so that column is complete, true, false, and then 4 false. Now we're going to look at Q and R, so now I'm going to shift a little bit and look at the Q and the R columns and compare those, and it's an and statement again, so they both have to be true to put a true there. So the first one is true, the next one is false, the next one is false, and false again, and then a true, and then a false, and then 2 more false. Okay, so that column is done. It reads true, false, 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 true, false, false, false. And I gotta fix that F. Okay, so now let's go to the last column, which is for the second statement, and we'll do that in green. So we're gonna look at the 2 columns that we just created, but it's an or statement this time. So if there's a true in either column, I can put a true here. So it's gonna be true, and then false, and then true, false, true, and then it looks like it's false the rest of the way down. So I'll get that filled in. And now I have to decide whether or not the blue column and the green column, which represent my 2 statements, whether or not they're logically equivalent. So I'm going to compare just literally what's in the blue to what's in the green, and if they are identical, then these are logically equivalent. And it looks like they are because they both read true, false, true, and then 3 false. So I would conclude for this that these 2 statements are yes, they are logically equivalent. So hopefully this will make the other 2 problems that I'm asking you to do easy, quite frankly, because I believe the other 2 problems only involve P and Q, if memory serves me. So they should be a little bit shorter than this one. Good luck, and make sure you turn this in by midnight tomorrow night.